Hey, all you mentees, Uncanny Omar here from Near Mint Condition, and join me for my overview of the Milestone Compendium Volume 1 from DC Comics. So, please stay tuned. And welcome back, everybody. So here we have the Milestone Compendium Volume 1. I do love the fact that it says Volume 1, because it gives me hope for future volumes, and hopefully future volumes will include the Worlds Collide crossover, where these characters collided with the DC Universe. So here we have the Milestone logo, the DC logo of course, and some of the characters like Icon and Static Shock Hardware, and some of the Blood Syndicate back there. On the image spine right here you have, I think that is John Paul de Leon, and that is of course Static Shock, one of the breakout stars of this particular era of comics. Love that they're doing this. Kind of wish this would have been a hardcover though. But they have all the covers to the books that are collected in here. The retail price of this book being $59.99. Again, you have the DC logo and the Milestone logo there. The Big Bang, which plays a huge role in the origins of a lot of the characters in here. It is a compendium, meaning that it is soft cover. There's no dust jacket. It is soft cover like a trade paperback. It is a thick book. Talk about the pages here, but the most important thing, in case you're not familiar with the term compendium, is that it is smaller than your omnibus editions. This is the size of a trade paperback. For example, here is an image trade paperback for size comparison. It's just as tall. Of course, it's thicker. And here it is compared to the size of an omnibus. You see the omnibus editions and oversized hardcovers are taller, making the art bigger than what you will find in these particular compendiums. They are, of course, cheaper. You know, on average, you're paying $100 to $150. Oh man, recently I saw that the DC 52 omnibus is now being solicited at $175 for an omnibus. So I'm just gonna keep it safe and say $100 to $150 for an omnibus. Whereas these, I think none of them have gone over $59.99, but please correct me if I'm wrong. Yet the page count on a compendium is sometimes bigger, if not just a little bit smaller than what an omnibus page count is. Of course, these are hardcovers and these are soft covers. And if you watch my Spawn Compendium Volume 2, you do see that sometimes, in very, very rare cases, because I haven't heard hardly anyone complain about the new compendium builds, they do develop a crease after a few times that you've read them. Spawn Compendium 1 didn't, and neither did Incorruptible, and what was the other book that I gave away? Sweet Tooth. Those did not. It was for some reason just the build of Spawn Compendium 2. Alright, so let's get this book open, talk a little bit about the brief history of when this took place, what exactly is the Milestone, is it a separate universe? And then, of course, showcase the artwork and talk about some of the little stories found in here. And I don't mean little as in the meaning, I mean just the kind of collection. It's kind of scattered about what they did with this particular collection. Alright, so the very first thing I want to point out is that the cover is different than the cover that's been solicited. The cover that's been solicited, I think, just has a picture of Hardware, this gentleman right here. So this book, again, retailing for $59.99. It has 1,320 pages. So if 1,320 pages bothers you on a softcover because you're worried about it making a crease, or you're worried about the binding just falling apart eventually, collections like this may not be for you. But like I said, the new builds of these have been a lot better than the previous years. So here is your table of contents right here. I'm telling you the page number. They do have page numbers. Love it. The covers all include the issue numbers. They're not what they call the virgin covers. Not just art. You actually know what issue you are reading without having to go back and forth between the table of contents and the issue. I love that. I wish all of DC's collections were like that. So this does collect Hardware issues 1 through 12, Blood Syndicate 1 through 12, Icon 1 through 10, Static 1 through 8, and Zombie 0 through 11, and Shadow Cabinet number 0. So now let's talk a little bit about what the Milestone universe was, or it still is, because you do see these characters pop up from time to time. So back in 1993, a group of creators got together, mainly Dwayne McDuffie, who you'll see a lot in here. God rest his soul, he was one of my favorite creators of all time. Dennis Cohen, Michael Davis, and Derek Dingle got together and decided that the big two companies weren't publishing a lot of work by minorities. So they started making their own imprint. They decided to call it the Milestone Universe. And they had its own universe, which is known as the Dakota Universe. It's the city where these stories take place. And DC decided to actually publish those stories. So they were the ones selling it, even though they didn't really get to make a call as to what the stories could be about. They couldn't really censor things, with the exception of a few covers. But they worked together with those 4 main editors and decided, what covers could stay out. I remember one time in particular, I think it was a Static cover that gave DC issues. I read it in a Wizard article. They talked about having censoring, and mainly it was like just the idea of sex was not good on a cover. And the counter argument was like, you guys over sexualize women and all, you're like, look at Power Girl. Anyway, they went back and forth, and eventually they decided to settle on, okay, removing a couple of things from the cover. But it was these group of people that decided to make this particular universe, like hiring minorities from just different parts of the United States at first, and then from the world, and to make stories about characters that look like them. So I'm glad that they ended up releasing this on Black History Month, because this was originally supposed to come out last year, I believe in October. Then it got postponed, and I think they decided on January. So I think it makes more sense that it actually came out in Black History Month. I think that would have made Dwayne McDuffie really proud. Now, originally it was supposed to be Christopher Priest that was one of the creators, but I don't know what ended up happening there. I remember talking to him at a convention about 10, 12 years ago and asking him why he never really had any of the stories towards the beginning, and he was like, yeah, some things just kind of fell apart. And I get it, that's what happens in business. So these were brand new characters, brand new fictional city that have never appeared before in the pages of comics. Some of them, of course, are very stereotypical looking characters, but there's a different charm and twist to each one of these that I think talking about that, specifically the character of Icon, would give away, to me at least, like some of the things that makes the Milestone universe so special. So this is Hardware. What you're looking at here is artwork by Dennis Cohen, and Dwayne McDuffie is the main writer on Hardware. Now, if you're wondering, if you're familiar with the Milestone universe, how this is split up, how the book is mapped, for the most part, it's mapped pretty good, honestly. It's not like the first few story arcs of Hardware are together, and then we get into the Blood Syndicate. So here we go, Blood Syndicate number 1 right here. And the Blood Syndicate is, again, Dwayne McDuffie, and he's working with Ivan Velez and Dennis Cohen supplying the artwork at first, and then Chris Cross joining. There's early artwork in here from J.H. Williams III, which looks completely different for somebody that has been, he's my number 2 favorite artist of all time. It looks so interesting to go back, to 1990, I guess it would have been, late 1993 to see what his artwork looked like. But Blood Syndicate, and I'll talk about each of these stories here, comes next here in a little bit. And then you have the story of Icon. So the first few story arcs of Icon are collected. And then you have Static. And the artwork by on Static is John Paul Leon. And I forgot about Icon. I should have mentioned that. This artwork for the very first few story arcs in Icon is done by M.D. Bright. And again, Dwayne McDuffie writing the stories. And as far as Static, the stories are done by Dwayne McDuffie and Robert Washington, who eventually I think takes over the book. And then John Paul Leon, who does the artwork. And it's another phenomenal creator that passed away way too young. And that's Static Shock. So you have those first few story arcs. You got about 5 to 6 issues of each. And then for some reason, you get, I don't agree with this, Zombie, number 1. And the reason I don't agree with that is because I remember Zombie Zero being the introduction of this character. And Zombie's a little bit different. Maybe that's why they added him in here. He didn't appear until the second year, because there were only 4 comics in 1993, which you just saw. Hardware, Blood Syndicate, Icon, and Static. And then in 1994, there were a few spin-off series like the Shadow Cabinet, which issue 0's in here, and Zombie. And Zombie kicked off with issue number 0 of this character named Daniel, what was his name? Daniel Kim, I think. But this right here was written by John Rusum and Dennis Cohen doing some of the artwork. So Dennis Cohen was a busy guy. But it's weird to see issue 1 in here because this is his actual origin issue, and maybe that's why they kept it in here. This talks about how he's able to absorb power. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about, or not powers, but body parts. Let's talk about these characters, what they are like. So let's go back to hardware. So here you have the genius Curtis Metcalf. And Curtis Metcalf works for a corporation that makes supplies weapons to crime syndicates in Dakota. So instead of trying to fight crime the legal way, he takes it upon himself, because he's a genius, to make weapons and put this new hardware on to take down these gangs after hours. So his daytime job, he's a brilliant scientist, or brilliant inventor, rather, for this corporation. I think what was it called? Alva Corporation, A Better Chance, or something like that. But at night, he dons the costume of hardware. So, very similar to something that you might have seen in the pages of Marvel, of course, with Iron Man. But there's a couple of twists and interesting things about his character and the decisions that he makes. There are crossovers in here, by the way, within each of the stories. Like, you'll see hardware show up in Blood Syndicate. There's an actual crossover in this particular volume with all 4 of the books. And then, of course, what kicks off the zombie book. So here's Blood Syndicate. And Blood Syndicate... Uncanny Omar talk, pretty wet day. Blood Syndicate is unique in the way that the team is formed. They're not the Avengers. They're not even the New Warriors. I can't believe I just made that analogy. They're not the Justice League or Young Justice. These are the remaining gang members of something called the Big Bang. Remember when I said the Big Bang that's on the back of the blurb and how it plays a big role in a lot of the origin stories? The Big Bang is like, what was it up? Paris Island. A bunch of gang members went to a big war, and then the police decided to just spray them down, hose them down with this, what they didn't know, or they say they didn't know, this radioactive kind of gas. Anyway, it had side effects. It killed a bunch of them, and then it had side effects, and some of those gang members started developing power. So you have Brickhouse here, DMZ, Tech-9, Fade, Holocaust, Flashback. Later on, you have Dog and Boogeyman. I love Dog. Dog's just a dog that develops human speech. That's it. Now, there are characters throughout this particular... Even in the first few story arcs, a lot of them don't make it. So I love the revolving cast of Blood Syndicate. So they're a group of gang members that just decide to team up one day. And this is for Tech-9 and Holocaust for fighting over the leadership of the Blood Syndicate. But... yeah, it's very unusual, You were seeing things in here that you weren't seeing in other comic books. I think that's why I'll talk a little bit about what ended up happening with the cells of these stories. But let's get to Static, because let's get to Icon. Icon, I think, has one of the most unique stories. And I'll talk a little bit about his origin and not go into detail. Now, you see him here with a young lady. This is Rocket. He is an alien from outer space, but instead of arriving in, say, 1939 or 1937, he arrived 100 years earlier, and he appeared in a field, and a slave woman actually picked him up and adopted him as a child, and he mimicked the way that she looked. He changed the way he looked as an alien and changed it into an African-American male. And he doesn't age. He stopped aging as an adult, so he's been alive since 1839 here on Earth, and he has to take a different name every few years. So I think he just pretends to be his father and his grandfather, if I remember correctly. But it is August Freeman IV, and that's how he keeps his secret identity. This young lady named Raquel finds out about him. I think she was a thief at first, and then she became his team member. There are real interesting issues that happen in between the relationship between both of them, and I think that's what a lot of people noticed about that particular series. It's not your rip-off Superman, and I know it may seem like that, but that's like saying Moon Knight is a rip-off of Batman, or Green Arrow is a rip-off of Batman, when those two characters are so completely different than Batman, if you understand what I'm going with that. So Icon was my favorite story out of the ones that came from the first year of Milestone. I know Hardware was the very first book, but Icon for me was just amazing. And then you have Static, who I'm sure most of you probably know because he's joined the Teen Titans, and I'll talk a little bit about that here in a second as to how that's possible if this is a different universe. And also because he had his own show, Static Shock, produced by Dwayne McDuffie, his co-creator. And you do have wonderful work here of John John Paul Leon. And then you have Zombie here. And Zombie has a very interesting premise. I think I talked a little bit about it. But you have this scientist, David Kim. I think I called him Daniel Kim. He's out of a different city. I think he's out of New Jersey. Who is trying to develop this new virus that can regenerate tissues. So kind of like Dr. Kurt Connors, the lizard. But something goes bad, an arch nemesis shows up, kind of wants to steal this formula from him. So his assistant, when he gets hurt badly, gives him this test formula. And now his power is that he can devour other body parts from different people. So he could be potentially immortal. That's his particular ability. And let's get a little bit here. So yeah, once you go through the first story arc of Zombie, you have some more stories of Hardware here. With this particular character, oh my gosh, what is his name? I think it was Death Wish or something ridiculous like that. It's very reminiscent of like Charles Bronson's movie Death Wish. I think he ended up getting his own little miniseries later on. So yes, the universe started expanding in the second year. You got you have a collection of Shadow Cabinet here, number 0, which is a brand new team. So towards the end is where you have the big crossover called Shadow War, where these characters are overlapping with each other's stories. Like you have Holocaust from the pages of Blood Syndicate, appear in the pages of Icon, and then you have Static Shock teaming up with Hardware, and all of it ends in the pages of a new book called The Shadow Cabinet, and it is Shadow Cabinet number 0, which ends that particular crossover, and then that becomes an ongoing series. So all these characters are together, and now they realize that they're not the only superhero, that superheroes exist outside of this. Now, I am going to talk a little bit, I'm sorry, that's about the only premise I kind of want to give away. I hope the artwork is what's really selling you all on this and the curiosity. I will say that I picked up Hardware number 1 when it came out, and I could not find issues 2, 3, or 4. So what happened, and I don't know if it happened at every comic book store, but the 5 comic book stores in central Kentucky where I lived carried a couple of number 1 issues, and then they stopped carrying the series. Because a lot of them determined that this was more of an African-American targeted audience, that people that lived in central Kentucky didn't want anything to know about these particular characters. And so I had to start a folder at one particular store so I could get Hardware and I could get Icon. Because at the time, I'll be honest, I wasn't in it for the stories outside of X-Men. That's why I kept reading X-Men in the 90s. But I thought it was a profitable way to secure my future by buying a bunch of number 1s and then at least buying the first 10 issues of each series. That's why I had like a bunch of those crap. I think I had 5 copies of Turok number 1. I had 3 copies of Super Pro. Oh my gosh. Anyway, don't judge me. That's what I was doing. But that's what I was doing with this, and I couldn't find issues 2, 3, and eventually I got 4, 5. But that was the mentality around here, and I don't know if that was the mentality everywhere around the United States, where a lot of comic book stores at least weren't carrying these books because they thought the target audience, weren't their target audience. But it turns out that a lot of people wanted to check out the universe. They wanted to know what the heck a lot of people didn't even know what the hell Milestone was until the big crossover with Superboy and Steel. What was that? The Worlds Collide crossover. A lot of people had no idea that these characters were in other books, were in another dimension. Now, since then, of course, because of Final Crisis and New 52, a lot of the characters have merged into the DC universe, whatever the hell it's called now. It's not the Rebirth universe, but the DC universe. So that's why you see Static appear in the pages of Teen Titans. That's why even before Final Crisis, you saw the big return of them during Dwayne McDuffie's run on Justice League, which showed Icon and a couple of the members of the Blood Syndicate fight against the Justice League. So they were bringing back different universes too. They were also doing Tangent at the time. And that was another thing I was going to say. This also came out in 1993 when, there were a couple of other publishers just kicking it off that year. And then we had the big crash in 94, 95, and a lot of the titles got canceled. So the universe really stuck around until I think it was after I left comics, so maybe 97, 98 is when Milestone just kind of ended. And you do see the characters appear from time to time in the pages of DC Comics. So, but to me, this is a historical part of comics. Like, it was the very first time that a group of minorities got together and did what Image did. We're going to make our own thing. Of course, they ended up getting published by DC, but they didn't really have to follow DC editorial. There are a lot of mature themes in here you couldn't get away in normal comics. I mean, we're talking about cocaine dealers. We're talking about, well, you know what? You can read it for yourself and judge what I mean. The language is toned down a little bit. It is edited. It's that's the way it was originally released. But you can make out the vulgarity. They hide it a lot less than the big two hide the vulgarity when they were publishing comics. But let's look at this binding because, well, actually, let's look at the extras. I don't know if there's any extras. Okay, the variant cover. That's the one that I had for hardware. There's Blood Syndicate variant cover. So, okay, so these are all just variant covers. The Arsenal. No sketches or anything, just hardware's Arsenal back here. And then the biography on the man himself, Dwayne McDuffie, Ivan Velez, John Rossum, Robert Washington, Mark D. Bright. Okay, just the bio on all the people that came together the first year. But again, you'll see things like from J.H. Williams, Jimmy Palmiotti, doing some of the inks in here. But the binding, I mean, it's the same as all the other compendiums. Glued binding. It lays over, I think it lays over all right. I mean, I was flipping through the first pages. I had to hold it down because it's a soft cover. Of course, with the weight, it's going to close on you. But, I mean, there's no fighting that in a compendium. It's not a hardcover. And hell, I mean, some hardcovers even do this. So it's not like it's a sin to be doing this for a soft cover that has over 1,300 pages. But that, as they say, is that. If you're interested in purchasing this book, don't forget to check out our sponsor, cheapgraphicnovels.com, your online home for brand new graphic novels and collected editions up to 50% off cover price. They pride themselves on packaging your books so they arrive safely and in excellent condition, as well as prompt and helpful service. Check out the bargain deals for up to 90% off cover price. CGN is excited to announce that they are now taking pre-orders. They're making it easier for you to ensure that you don't miss out on the hottest releases. CGN is currently running a special promotion for you Minties. If you're a first-time customer, let them know that you were referred by Near Mint Condition at the checkout, and you'll receive a credit for free shipping on your next order. This promotion is valid for U.S. customers only. Cheap Graphic Novels, your source for the hottest books with the kind of deep discount and quality shipping and customer service that will keep you coming back for more. And that was the content, the page count, and build of this compendium. Let me know in the comments down below if you've picked it up, if you've never heard of the Milestone universe, and you just got a brief little history, and I mean that is a brief little history lesson as to what Milestone was and what it meant to a lot of people. If you have any questions, leave your questions down below. Again, this was the Uncanny Omar. I hope to see a Volume 2 and Volume 3 of this particular compendium, and maybe one day an omnibus edition. And more importantly, all of you stay healthy, stay safe out there. Much love.